Hello and welcome to our Boost in Conversation series, an opportunity to sit down with figures past and present from the Boost scaling programme and beyond that aims to unleash the power of partnerships to support organisations with proven solutions to some of the UK's social challenges. My name is Ajit Jugnut. I work for the Young Foundation, one of the delivery partners of the Boost programme that sits within the wider Inclusive Economy Partnership, working with Cabinet Office, DCMS, the Conduit Club and Conduit Connect. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Sam Olsen, CEO of Movement to Work, a coalition of UK employers, youth outreach organisations, training providers and government allies, all aiming to level the playing field for young people aged 16 to 30, facing barriers to work. And stepping in for David Lett, we have Jessica Tyrrell, Area Manager of New Meaning, for New Meaning, who operates Toolshed, a social enterprise and an innovator in individual attitude development, community enterprise, ethical construction and social action, and just so happened to be one of our BOOST alumni and current cohort members for 2021. So welcome to you both. In today's session, we're going to be exploring the routes to funding for service providers operating in the further education and skills sector. But before we delve deeper into this, I'd like to bring Sam Olsen in to help paint a picture for us for where we are right now. So Sam, over to you. In the same week that the UK government have announced the roadmap back to normality, what is the new normal for young people, employers and service providers?
Josh, there's a how long have I got to answer?
You've got 15 minutes, so if you can articulate that really concisely in a grand way, that would be amazing.
Let's have more of a conversation about it. The simple answer is that not everyone's in the same place, is what I'd say. So we, in one sense, are in a really strange place from an economy perspective at the moment. Across my employers, we have more opportunities and more vacancies than we have ever had. Businesses have really lent into the thinking of the social impact that has happened through COVID. I've really started to take very seriously their responsibility to the wider communities that they are part of. And I'm seeing a huge amount of opportunities, whether or not that's leaning into the Kickstart programme, opening up more apprenticeships, creating more work experience opportunities. We host all our opportunities on something called Get My First Job. And if you go on to Get My First Job at the moment, there are more opportunities than we have ever had. Now, in one sense, isn't that fantastic? In another sense, the real challenge is what we don't have is an awful lot of young people coming forward for those opportunities. So from a market dynamic perspective, you then look at the unemployment rates and look at the levels of youth unemployment specifically and the number of young people on the claimant count at the moment and say, hang on, that's also disproportionately high. Like, how are these two things happening at the same time? And if you think of some of the impact maps that you have seen around COVID, and go back in time 12 months ago when we started to see that there were specific parts of the country and specific communities within specific parts of the country that were being disproportionately affected by COVID. And they were communities where we had really high social deprivation. That is the same and being mirrored for youth unemployment at the moment. So I saw some phenomenal stats this week, actually, where you can see that the unemployment, it was actually the employment rate. So the employment rate for the over 45s is now higher than it was pre-COVID. Fantastic. However, for young people, it's lower. And then I'm afraid if we lean into that data more, if you're a young person of colour or if you're a young person with a disability, you are now 20 to 40% more likely to be unemployed than you were pre-COVID. So it feels like we're seeing those inequalities that we knew about and we were aware about pre-COVID are actually being exasperated right now. So we then start to talk to those young people, don't we? and understand why they're not leaning forward into these opportunities. Now, part of it, and I'll put myself in this. I was a long time ago a shiny new grad with my shiny degree in maths from good old Hull University. And our shiny graduates have jumped into opportunities that would have historically gone to young people without degrees who are further from the labour market. So there is a bit of that going on at the moment, particularly in hospitality and retail. And our concern of that is that graduates and those with degrees have absolutely no stickability in those sectors. Once the graduate programs open up, what we anticipate seeing is those young people moving into those milk round graduate trainee programs as they open up next year. But what we've really done is held back people who are further from the labour market even further, because they still haven't managed to get that experience. Talking to young people, what we see is we know there are mental health issues that need dealing with post the pandemic. But there is also a real sense of, hang on, we're in communities who have been disproportionately affected by COVID. We are the young people who are often pointed to by the media as having been super spreaders. Our peers are permanently being sent back from school, or if they've gone to university, they've still not gone permanently to university. And by the way, we've not been vaccinated yet, but you seem to think that it's a good idea for my job coach to encourage me to go and work in retail and hospitality. There is a lot of negativity from young people in this space. And I was reflecting on this with a couple of different organisations who are just looking at trying to encourage their existing staff back into the workplace. And in our existing workforce, we're having these really in-depth, sensitive conversations about meeting our staff where they are today. All the organisation I speak to say, look, we're going to start opening our office, but it's going to be for individuals to come when they feel safe. We need to respect and think about people who've been shielding, how people feel about going on trains, using public transport. We've got to meet our staff where they are. And my message to my colleagues in government and to businesses at the moment is we need to meet in the same way that we need to meet staff where they are, about encouraging them back into the office. We need to meet young people where they are. And where they are is at home, is online, is often in multi-generational families, and is often in a space where they have become very cocooned in a very, very small community bubble. And whether or not we're a youth-focused organisation or a business, we need to meet those young people where they are and think about how we help them back into a world of seeing a job in coding in the city, of seeing a job of being a financial analyst in the city, or seeing a job in retail in Marks and Spencer's or Tesco, that these are achievable and good and great places to be, and taking young people on that journey from where they are, as opposed to just thinking that they're going to pop out post-COVID and say, yes, yeah, I'm ready for the workplace, I'm here. That's just not where many young people are at the moment. So that was quite a broad answer to that question of where's everyone at the moment. I'd say very, very different places. And I'm a little bit worried at the moment that some of the existing issues that we were facing in society about social mobility and social deprivation are just being made worse as we come out of the pandemic. And how do we solve some of those fractured issues as opposed to just exasperating them over the next 6 months?
I mean, a brilliant scene setter there, and I definitely invite our guests who have joined us today to hold on to some comments until the Q&A that you might have around that, and definitely want to hear from others on your experiences and whether or not that resonates. Sam, thank you so much for setting that scene. In the context of the service providers, and we have many here with us today, what does that mean in terms of the funding opportunities that are available then? How do we approach that?
So there's from a service delivery perspective, there are a huge amount of opportunities out there at the moment, aren't there? There are still availability for Kickstart programs. There's a lot of emphasis on businesses developing apprenticeship programs. There's the Restart program. There's sector-based work academies. There's increasing funding available for businesses for traineeships. If anyone feels that sounds like a big spaghetti mess of a gazillion different government programs, that would be fair, actually. It's quite complicated, the number of different programs out there. And I can see Jess chuckling at that. If you go onto the Movement to Work website, we have created a tool to try and help you to access different government programs, to work out which ones are best for you and what's best to access. So do feel free to contact us. I'm not going to try and explain them all here. The trickier piece, I would say, which is the how to access funding that's about supporting the young person as a whole to get them ready for an employability programme. And that, I think, is far more in the space of grant funding and looking within the sector. But there are a number of employers at the moment who are wanting to do a lot more, but are restricted by not having access to young people. So if you are running a program that has a group of young people who are engaged, I'd really encourage you to start thinking about talking to some of the larger corporates at the moment, because this is the piece of the jigsaw puzzle that we're all really grappling with.
Thank you so much. I think that ties in very nicely to actually hear from Jess now in terms of how New Meaning have applied that thinking. And if, Jess, you don't mind sharing a bit more of the New Meaning story and how your model works and the funding that you guys access.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sam. I mean, I think we need to talk. There's a lot there, and I loved that. So thank you so much. So I'm going to try and keep still, because when I move around, it gets blurred in the background. So our overriding objective was to not be donation or grant funded. As you guys all know, that's for a number of reasons, partly because it's stressful and it's time consuming and it's inconsistent. So we do accept grants and funding donations, but for us, that's between 3 and 5%, no more than that. So I guess the question remains then, so how are you funded if you're not doing it through grant and donation funding? So also a big one actually that I missed there is that we have got a really clear objective. And when, as I'm sure a lot of you have found yourselves, when you're reliant on grant and donation funding, often that comes with strings and stipulations. So suddenly you've got your core service that you know it works, you know it's what the young people need, whether the employers or the employees, but in our case, it's for our neat young people. We know what works. And so to add the different strings onto that it dilutes your service. And ultimately, we're all here to serve the young people. So how do we do it? Well, we first asked ourselves, what is it that the young people need? And we recognise from their perspective, what they need is a nationally recognised qualification, something that's accredited and something that they can go in and say, look, this is a piece of paper that I've got, and this is who's backing this piece of paper. And our core service and our core aim for everything that we do is to help young people earn an independent living. And whether that's through, there's lots of routes to that, as Sam has said, but for us, that route is offering an accredited qualification. Now, we set up 3 accredited programs, and therefore we are eligible to draw down on government funding. as if we were a school or college. Now, we actually subcontract through a college. So our college that we subcontract through is BUCS College Group, and our students therefore enroll with BUCS College Group. BUCS College Group notifies the Education Skills Funding Agency. The ESFA then pays the college, and the college then pays us. So it is laborious and it is bureaucratic, and it does mean paperwork, and there are pros and cons that we will come on to, but ultimately it means that we have a steady income, an income stream that we know how much we're going to get paid. We're able to look ahead, and we're able to keep our service really tight and offer a core service that meets the needs of the young people, but also we know it's what the employers need as well. So I've scribbled loads of notes from what Sam said, and actually meeting them where they are today. That's exactly what we do. So we go to their homes, we do online provision, and ours is this really steady, flexible model whereby, yes, we aim to get them in our centre, we get them used to and closer to the job market, but actually, unless we meet them where they are today, we're not going to get that hook to get them on board.
Thanks, Jess. I was wondering if we could delve a bit deeper into that model that you just shared with the Education Skills Fund Agency and through BUCS College, and you've alluded to it, but the pros and cons of that model. I'm sure there are going to be others who are probably operating in the same field, and maybe some of this might resonate. But for you guys, for new meaning, what appears to be some of the pros and cons of that approach?
Yeah, sure. So the funding, and forgive me if everybody knows this, so there's two types of funding. There's E1 funding that every student in the UK is eligible for. So that's a set amount of money that you will get paid if you're teaching a certain course. And then the second gets a little bit more complicated. So there's E2 and E3 funding. And that's if a young person is SEN, special educational needs. Now, that's where it gets a bit more complicated. And if anybody here wants to know a bit more about that, I'm happy to have a separate discussion on that. Now, where it also gets tricky is about 40% of our young people do have an education healthcare plan, but I would say as many as an extra 40% of that have the needs, but they're not accompanied with the funding that supports them. And that's where things get really tricky, because when they have an education healthcare plan, you can support them up to their 25th birthday, whereas with E1 funding, you get paid until their 19th birthday, and then it's a different ball game. So that is one of the cons, that actually you are limited to who you can help, even though sometimes you see young people that really do need your help. And as a model, we do have a model where we try and take 2 or 3 young people in every location, whereby the surplus money we make, we fund, being a social enterprise, we put back in so that we can fund those places. But, that is still limited with what we can do. So the other cons to it, as I kind of lightly mentioned before, it is difficult, because you're now going to be held accountable by Ofsted. So everything's got to be absolutely to the T how they want it. And when you're a social enterprise, you're used to being able to, bend and shape and move to what the need is, rather than what the box says is needed. So we are constantly having this little jive between, right, okay, what is it that we need to do? And what is it that young people need us to do? And how can we do both? And sometimes that's tough, it means, and there are the paperwork. There's a lot of paperwork that goes alongside it, which is not my favorite thing to do, and not my strength either. But the pros are that we get to have an income that we can rely on. that it means it's funding a service that is needed, and it means that we are, I think, because of the nationally recognised qualifications, there's also a legitimacy to what we offer. But another con is the college sets the numbers that we have. We have to go to them every time we want to expand, every time we've got more young people that we want to help, we have to go to them and they have to approve it, rather than another 10 young people coming that really are in need and saying, of course, like, we've got capacity. No, we have to go and make sure that's approved. And those numbers are really quite firm.
In terms of growth then, are there other routes that you're exploring, or are there other parts of the business that you guys have that are looking at increasing that funding?
Yeah, there are actually. So I'm just going to take a quick drink of water.
Absolutely.
So we initially started, we've got 3 main courses, 3 accredited courses. One is our work and study program, which is one-on-one English with the young people, and then 3 days a week doing work experience. Now that, even the work experience we get funded for, because that counts towards the guided learning hours, which is really super clever. The second, and our kind of original course, hence the original name of Toolshed, is a construction course, where they're in and they're learning a bit of painting and decorating, a bit of carpentry, a bit of plumbing, a bit of tiling. Now, when we initially started that, we are all about rewarding the behaviour we want to see. So we thought, okay, what can we do, especially when it comes to the right attitude? What can we do to reward that and, promote that and get more of that? So we started a little DIY handy person service. And it was such a success. It really took off. The young people loved it. They were getting paid. They were getting to put their skills into practice. And especially the elderly people in the local community, they loved it. They'd get a cup of tea. They'd get a really affordable service. Everyone's happy. However, there was one thing that we did not take into account, is that the young people don't drive. So we basically became taxi drivers, which was quite fun. As most of you will know, getting to sit next to a young person and having them in the car is a great way to find out about them and to really build rapport. And, so from that point of view, it was amazing. But David, our founder, he thought, right, so this is working in principle, but at the moment we're zip here, there and everywhere. So what can we do? And it came to him. Why don't we build houses? And then we'll be in one place. And that's what we're doing. So we have finished building our 12th house. We have now also built 12 homeless pods, which had a tiny, weeny little feature in OK magazine. And we now employ, 12 seems to be the number, I don't know why, but we now employ 12 of our graduates full time. So that is now providing another income stream, which we're using to fund more of those places, so that more young people can come on without us having to just draw down the money. And so this year I took on 2 19 pluses that don't have an education and healthcare plan but wanted, and in time that's just gonna grow. Yeah,
amazing story of how it's all progressed there. Well done, and obviously do share with us that piece on that got featured in OK. It'd be amazing to see that. I just got a couple more questions for you, Jess, and I kind of go back to the scene setter that Sam gave us. But do those challenges and those trends that Sam mentioned, do they resonate, or are you seeing anything different from your perspective, from the new meaning side?
Well, do you know what? First of all, I got really excited when Sam was talking, because Sam knows more from the employer point of view, and actually, it's such a good point. There's lots of opportunities out there now, and employers are kind of opening their doors, which, let's face it, makes financial sense for them. And I hadn't really thought about the graduates kind of almost lowering their expectations for now and how that impacts. But that's a really interesting point. And when we're providing work experience, we're going out and having conversations with local employers, and hopefully when Sam and I talk, we can maybe expand that to the corporates as well, because that would be a great conversation to have. And funnily enough, this year, people do seem to be more receptive and actually starting to think, because we're doing 3 days a week for a year. This isn't just your schoolwork experience where you're out for a week. And yeah, it's great, you know, it's a great idea, but this way you get to know the young person. Try before you buy for both parties, which is really, really important. I'm just looking at my notes now from when Sam was talking to make sure I'm kind of ticking off all the points. Mental health issues, absolutely. I mean, we've got young people that will not go on public transport now. And yes, they haven't been vaxxed. And they're kind of like, so you're expecting me, you've been telling me, because anxiety, we know anyway, is a lot higher in young people, just anyway. This is pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. I mean, we've got young people that haven't left their houses. And yes, we go to them, but this year, even more so with young people signing up, they're saying, oh, but we heard you could come to the house. Although they won't sign up if they can't come to the house, if you can't come to the house. And we're like, well, yeah, that's fine. We'll come to the house, but we will work towards you coming out. And maybe we'll just do a lesson in a month or two in the cafe at the end of your road, and then maybe in the cafe a bit further. And then, you know, we'll kind of progress this. And yeah, there's this massive instability. And we all know about the lemon juice or the Ribena or whatever it is, getting the COVID test. I don't fancy going to school. So we find that with the school holidays as well. Suddenly we'll have employers call us up and be like, so-and-so hasn't signed up today. Oh, yeah, of course, all their friends aren't in school at the moment, school holidays. They haven't thought to say to the employer, because, you know, we haven't said that they've got the time off. So actually, when there's young people around, it's temptation, isn't it? And for a lot of these young people, let's face it, they haven't been having the social lives that they want and deserve. So if the friends are out and actually doing something that's a nice day, you know, that is going to impact them.
I like this. I like the point that you're coming towards, and I hope you don't mind. I'd like to bring Sam back into the conversation if I can, because for both of you, we're drawing attention to this need to re-inspire and re-engage young people into the workforce. And so I'd like to ask you both, if you can succinctly, in each of your opinions, how do we do that? I mean, Jess, you have mentioned a few ideas there, but if you could sum up coherently, and Sam as well, how do we do that? How do we re-inspire? How do we re-engage?
So there's quite a lot going on over the summer in the with the Careers Enterprise campaign. That's specifically in this space, a big campaign that's all about the jobs and the opportunities. I was speaking to Department for Work and Pensions about this week, of there is something about us almost creating the energy and the inspiration now, but thinking of a start date in September. In reality, in businesses, we're saying, you know, yes, we're opening up, but it will probably be September before we're really expecting people to properly be going back to the office. Why aren't we thinking about that, about our young people? What can we do over the summer that recognises them, reinvigorates them? I think that is probably okay for the middle cohort, but actually what I care passionately about and what we're about at Movement to Work is those young people furthest from the labour market. Good, strong youth work, you know, whether or not it's exactly what Jess is talking about, getting into homes. I'm not one for the carrot and stick approach of universal credit. But there is also something about how we've now had 2 cohorts, when you think about it, of young people who came off the gravy train, whatever you want to call it, of education early because of what has happened around the pandemic. And many of those young people will have gone on to universal credit in an odd environment when you weren't expected to go into the job centre every week, where you weren't expected to be physically demonstrating in front of somebody what you had applied for and what that looked like. So there's something of a reset of expectations that needs to be going on there. I'm a natural optimist as well, though, of saying I think it's important that we stay energised and positive for young people. I worry slightly that the media will create a negative response to the fact that we've got so many vacancies plus high levels of young and youth and employment, and how we remain positive for them, that say we understand, we're meeting you where we are, we understand that it's tough at the moment, but what can we do? And then my final thought on it is just to, in that being positive, it will come good, is I just think once they start to see their friends going into work, they're becoming a more normal, socially acceptable, you go to work, that is what life is about, and people start spending money again. Young people are very financially motivated, and actually people aren't out and about spending money as much at the moment, and once that starts to click in, I think that will become another motivator as we come post September. But let's not write them off over the summer. I'm not sure that was succinct, but hey.
No, but clear. Jess, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about meeting the young people where they are, as Sam said, but also understanding that progress isn't linear. You know, we will go forward and we will come backwards, and that doesn't mean they're regressed, or they to have someone there cheerleading them, showing them, look, this is where we can go, and listening to them. Ultimately, so often we're talking for them rather than stopping and asking them. They might not know where they want to go, but I tell you what, they know themselves, and they will be able to help you guide them. So working in partnership with them and making sure we're making these connections. Like, as Sam's saying, employers are there saying we're putting on the kickstarts, we're putting on the apprenticeships, we're doing all this, but we can't find the young people. So let's make sure we come together. Let's talk to each other. Let's work in partnership, because actually there will be people out there that have the employers' ear. There'll be people out there like us who have the young people's ear, and together we can really make something special. And I actually think it's a great time. There's been shifts in attitudes, and there's, you know, all of us. I don't know about anybody else, but when I first saw in Italy, they were talking about a lockdown. I was like, what? Oh, that's not going to happen. Surely that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen here. I mean, nobody's going to say to us, you can't leave your house. I mean, that's just not going to happen. And I genuinely believe that something this big that we never thought was possible that's happened, it's expanded our minds. We're now open. It's like, whoa, I never thought a reality TV star could become US president. I never thought a virus could, you know, make us all stay inside. What else is possible? If this has taught us anything, you know?
What a very optimistic note on that part. What I would love to do now, I did have one last question for our guest speakers, but I might save it to the very end. But what I'd love to do is, if I could ask our guests who've joined us today, if you don't mind putting your cameras back on, microphones on as well, off, so that we can hear you. I would love to start a conversation with everyone who's here today. And I hope she doesn't mind that I'm about to do this, but you've just posted something in the chat, Ellen. Ellen is one of our young people who've joined us through the Kickstart scheme, who's working with the Young Foundation as part of our peer research group. I'd love to hear from, and we've also got a few others as well who've joined the conversation. I would really love to hear your perspectives and whether or not any of what's just been said resonates from your perspective. And Ellen, if you don't mind, I'm pulling you up, but I know that you'll do a brilliant job in articulating your side, but if I can pull you in, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fine. I'm happy to share my experiences. So if anyone's got any questions for me, I'm more than happy to answer. So yeah, my name's Ellen, and I also work for the Young Foundation. And this has been really interesting for me, everything that's been said, because I was hired through the Kickstart scheme and I've had an incredible experience so far. I'm one of the 13 young peer researchers that were hired through the scheme, and we're actually about to start a research project in a couple of weeks that's commissioned by the Youth Futures Foundation that covers young people's barriers in employment. So it's very, very relevant to what we're doing.
Amazing, thank you so much, Ellen. We've also got a few other members from the BOOST program. I'm looking at Zoe at the moment from Agent Academy. I was wondering, Zoe, if you could share with us what you're up to in Liverpool.
Oh, thank you. Yes, so everything that everybody said really rings true as well. I mean, we tend to work with that age group of young people between the ages of about 18 and 30. And we're focused on digital and creative and tech careers and the gaps that exist there, and how we can encourage young people from underrepresented groups to take up careers in the industry that they wouldn't have ordinarily had access to, because for lots of reasons they're blocked out of our industry. Not having connections, not having the you know, when you can't see your family members in the same sector and stuff like that, you don't tend to go into those industries. So we focus on that. And one of the things that we found really interesting during this time is that the young people that we work with aren't always unemployed. Some of them are working in jobs that we've just heard about, so hospitality and retail. And before the pandemic, we found that the people that were coming to us were like 24-year-olds who might be on a 0 hours contract in a bar, but have like a flat to pay for and bills to pay and all of those things. And they get stuck in this really strange place where they can't go back to do education because that would cost, that they'd lose money from work and they can't afford to do that. And so they like look ahead at their futures and are like, right, is this it? But it's not really what I wanted to do. And the prospects are limited. So they come to us for 12 weeks and it's part-time. And during that time, we get them to a stage where they can then hit the ground running in the digital, creative and tech industry in a job. And for the sector, it's amazing because what you're getting is young people who have already got lots of interpersonal skills often and can just add so much value to an organization. It's been an interesting time though during the last 12 months, because you definitely see the impact that furlough schemes have also had on how that's changed attitudes. So we've found, surprisingly, we've had drop off in terms of our applications, and we're still oversubscribed, but we used to be like really oversubscribed, and that's been really interesting. And I think one of the things that I put that down to is like almost furlough and being paid 80% has created, instead of like people saying, right, I'll use this as an opportunity to learn, what we found is people have used it as an opportunity to just wait, and they haven't kind of got the same urgency. I feel like the world has stopped a little bit for everybody, and then we're just getting restarted now. So we're bracing ourselves in Liverpool and Manchester for a surge, I think, after like September when furlough ends, and you know, we can see there's lots of schemes happening, which is amazing. And unfortunately, a program like ours becomes really in demand during this time because people are out of work, but we're actually not seeing it as much just yet. We're like bracing ourselves for this surge, I think, of need that's coming down the line. So yeah.
Thank you, Zoe. I think that point in particular about motivation, I mean, I'm struggling to just get it to the gym in the mornings these days. So I mean, when it comes to even working out what you want to do with your career, I can imagine it's being a bit tough right now for a lot of people. I was wondering if I could actually bring in Tim Redding from VIY as well. One, because I'm admiring the piece of artwork that I can so glamorously see behind you, and I'm jealous. But I'd also love to hear, because you operate in quite a similar space to New Meaning, and how your organisation take that forward.
Yeah, and actually there's something that you said, Jess, that I was thinking, if I'm asked a question, I'm going to build on something you said, which was about the idea of making skills training very much something that's place-based and making it very accessible to young people's doorstep and their world. And I think for us, you know, if we've got any success to talk about, I think it's about trying to build a program which is as much about engaging young people in their local community and engagement in broader terms, and almost treating the skills benefits as a natural sort of byproduct through making that engagement piece work. I mean, I guess in our case, we work with young people who are typically very far removed from the job market, have probably struggled in conventional, traditional education and learning environments. And so there's a real job to get them to the start line in terms of re-engaging in learning and training. And I think our trick, if I could call it that, has been to contextualize it or to create a context where, in our case, it's about challenging young people to help fix up and repair local spaces and places that they might use and benefit from. So it might be their local youth club, it could be a local grassroots sports club, it could be a supported housing project. But the idea is that they're motivated first and foremost about taking a stake in their community and taking a stake in places that they use and benefit from. And then, hey, what do you know? You've created a context around which you can kind of almost by subterfuge drop in this mechanic of saying, well, why don't you learn trade and building skills on the job whilst doing that, and you'll be mentored by local professional tradespeople who are volunteers like yourself. And I think so for us the context has been everything. And I don't tend to talk about this as being a skills training entity. I tend to say that we're probably horribly ambitiously trying to do 3 things at once, where it's about volunteering, community cohesion, social action, combined with sort of community regeneration. And then also, yes, there's that skills and training element. But I think by doing that, it's allowed us to engage with maybe, a whole bunch of unlikely alliances. So I suppose that we don't get much funding that I would say is kind of, stamped as skills money. A lot of it is about organizations cross-sector. So it's employers, it's brands, it's local authorities, it's grant givers, governing bodies, youth referral partners, I think, who come to us to say, well, look, we're interested in engaging young people in their community or helping community assets, venues and places and spaces which are struggling to survive. And so we're almost tangentially unlocking money that I think wouldn't traditionally be earmarked or identified as skills money. But, I think that makes it all the more compelling because it's kind of, it's not linear. You're almost kind of drawing in a wider spectrum of funders, stakeholders, contributors. And so, as I say, if we've done any trick, I think it's about that. I also think by having, I guess our last financial year, I look at it, I did a nice pie chart recently, and I said, well, that we're fairly equally divided across private sector. So employers like Travis Perkins or construction companies, people who are relevant to our sector, local authorities who contract us, and typically that will be a facilities management team who come to us to say, look, we're responsible for a dozen community centres that are in danger of failing or closing. How can we help uplift them physically, but also re-engaging the community and taking a stake in those places? So they'll contract us to do that job, and then we'll work with grant givers, and then we'll work with national governing bodies. So it might be sports governing bodies like England Boxing, who have lots of rundown boxing gyms and clubs that are based in sort of community centres or youth clubs. But I also find that it's almost easier for us to unlock multiple funding partners all working together rather than one single funding partner, because it's kind of, it's almost saying to one sector or one funding partner, if you give us £1, that will help unlock £1 over here. And in turn, that will be a domino effect and unlock other match funding. So I think on everything we do, and again, it probably sounds horribly ambitious and complicated, but we've got this, I think, true kind of coalition of organizations who didn't realize they had a common agenda until we told them. And then they all say, well, hang on a sec, if they're in, we're in. And if you're in, we're in. And I really like that. I think it makes it sticky. And I think they all bring something to bear. A lot of them, I think all of our funders provide cash, but they also provide materials, products. They might provide progression pathways, so they guarantee apprenticeship places, or I think they provide mentors, so they help us mobilize tradespeople and construction operators. And I kind of like that. So it's kind, and even, you end up starting a conversation saying, look, first up, I don't want your money, but I do want your assets. I do want your people. I want your products. I want your placements. And so I think, that we've tried to build a position in a very non-formal space. But I think going back to the engagement piece, I think that's allowed us to have success in engaging people who are referred in as being hard to reach or hard to engage, because we never find that. We always find that they're super engaged and, super into it, because it doesn't feel like a training environment. It doesn't, it feels like a real job of work. It's, you've got, people mentoring, you've got the materials on a pallet waiting to work on. It's not fake or mock, it's a real job of work that's going to have a big impact on their community. And so I think it's, maybe it's about how we position it, how we talk about it, but I think that's the way we've approached it.
I think you've completely beautifully summarized the power of partnerships in there, and that's what we're all about with Boost. So thank you so much, Tim, for sharing that side of the story. And I loved what you brought up with engaging with the community. And I don't know if we have any organizations on the floor here who represent many of community organizations, but we'd certainly love to hear that perspective as well, and how you might want to work in collaboration in that way. But I am taking it to the floor. If there are any questions or comments from individuals, then please do feel free to, cameras on, mics off, to ask your questions to anyone who may be here who's just spoken.
Gee, I noticed that Savan has put a comment that we haven't covered, which is, how is the impact of mental health issues quantified or part of the debate?
Well,
Savan, I just wondered if you could elaborate a bit more before we give an answer.
Yes, absolutely. Disclaimer, I'm also supporting Boost Ventures on this program, and I'm thinking about Me Too, which is one of the your fellow Boost members, and there I've got an app that supports young people to discuss the issues that they've had between each other. So they're the first peer support group available. They've got each other, and I wonder when we're discussing employment issues and access to employment, how much mental health is really integrated part of the process, and how you deliver on this, or how you influence on this when you are connecting with your with other influencers, with other stakeholders as part of the debate.
You want me to jump in there?
Yeah, go for it.
So we have a best practice of people joining movement to work that says we know that where work experience programs work best and have the most positive impact is where a business runs it alongside a wraparound support partner. And whether or not that wraparound support partner is an organisation like many of you are on here, or Prince's Trust or Catch 22, actually that's not what makes a difference. What really makes a difference is just having that wraparound support of the young person that isn't within the business. And the statistics are phenomenal. When a business runs a employability programme and that wraparound support isn't there, the conversion either back into full-time education or into work sits between 35 and 40%. Add in the wraparound support and you see the positive outcome move to 75%. It's a huge leap. And when we speak to young people about it, they will say to us, it was about the buddying, it was about the mental health support, it was about having somebody there who was listening to me and helping me and supporting me in a way that wasn't about the skills I needed to learn on the job. Because actually, by the way, I don't want to talk to somebody who I'm trying to impress to get a job about all this stuff that's going on in my head. I need a separate space, a safe space. We found that young people don't naturally trust the sort of employee mental health programs that we run for the rest of our staff. It needs to be specific for them and needs to be trusted by them. So it's absolutely in there, as it's as important as ensuring that the program is financially inclusive for young people on our programs, because without it, I mean, why would you want to run a program that only had a 35% impact? So
thank you.
I think, I mean, I didn't know those stats, Sam, so thank you for sharing them. And for us, I think that's one of the reasons ours works so well, although I have to say there's a fine line between what we offer, which is mentoring coaching, and mental health support. And we have to be really clear on that boundary a lot. And actually there's young people that we're still working with, but until they are, you know, they've come through on the waiting list of our number 5, our local counselling service, or CAMS, then actually we know there's only so far we'll continue to support them, but we know the effect and the impact is going to be limited. But we provide exactly that wraparound support that Sam's just mentioned, because we're there and every week they see the same person, they have one-on-one time with them, they get to do their English and maths, they also get to reflect on their week, and then we'll speak to the employer and just check in, and then we'll go to the workplace every month and see how they're doing. They've just got someone there that they can, you know, it can be a range of things, can't it? It can be some, like, I'm really anxious about this, or it can just be like, someone said this and I wasn't quite sure what that meant, you know. It's kind of a little bit of everything, really.
Thank you both for those insights. We have about 8 minutes left. He's very specific with his timings. But before I ask my guest speakers my last question, I invite the floor again. If anyone has any comments to share, questions they'd like to ask our panelists, questions you might want to ask any others, please do feel free to step in. Now's your chance.
I've got a question.
Yes, Lucy, go ahead.
So I run a social enterprise film agency in London. At the moment, our training of young people is funded, and it has been funded for 3 years, but that funding is coming to an end. And we're trying to decide whether to self-fund through the film services that we sell to clients, or to look at different funding models, and have started to sell some of our services into schools through third-party charities. So everything you said is really useful and really interesting, especially the partnerships working in schools, but it feels almost impossible to get schools to engage through the front door, whether it's popping in, taking their kids on work experience, or sending them emails. It feels almost impossible at the moment to get a relationship with those schools. Any advice?
So I have an admission to make at this point, which if anyone's looked at my LinkedIn profile, you may have realised I am on. So the movement to work model is we are all seconded from either government or the individual businesses that are part of movement to work. I'm seconded from government, so I'm actually a director, when I'm not doing this, director in Department for Education, you'll be pleased to hear. The first thing I would say to you is think about the current environment. Schools are, I would never want to be quoted publicly as saying this, but I can say this as a parent, schools are on their knees. Schools have been trying so hard to ensure that they deliver the best possible education within the current environments, and keeping kids at school, keeping vulnerable kids safe. And it's really gone down to that basic level for many schools. How do we keep our kids safe? Our vulnerable kids who are on the edge of the child protection system, how do we keep them safe? That's their priority at the moment. So my first challenge to you would be, Lucy, whilst I would always be an advocate of blended financial models. Absolutely the way forward. I'm a chair of a charity myself. Moving us to a blended model has been what sustained us through COVID. So having that diversity really, really important. It's not the time to be talking to schools about this, I'd say, at the moment. Getting where schools are back to a more normal place, that's the time. My other suggestion would be to look at, instead of going directly into schools, look at some of the multi-academy trusts and build they tend to have a corporate infrastructure in the centre of them, and you're then having a conversation with one organisation who's responsible for, could be 5, could be 10, could be 20. So think about using that multi-academy trust model, but actually at the moment, unless you're selling hand sanitizer, they're probably not interested in talking to you.
That's really useful advice, thank you. Just to say one thing, there's lots of charitable organisations that are buying our services that we're then delivering into schools. So it seems like there's a lot of charitable organisations that have drawn down funding, restricted funding, in order to work in those schools. So it's just, thank you for painting the
I've got something to add there if it's useful. We've worked over 5 years with the Careers and Enterprise Company, who have supported us doing outreach into schools across the country. We've done about 600 schools, secondary, working with young people deemed at risk of exclusion or disengagement. And what was interesting there is that they left it to us to engage with schools, but that was done not via schools directly. We were always steered via the local enterprise partnerships, the LEPs. There's 38 LEPs across England, which are, I think, all kind of managed by our local authorities. And within that, they have a local enterprise coordinator who was the kind of go-to person to we were introduced to, and that was the person who had the local knowledge around for careers, education agenda, let's say, within schools, and understanding what schools might be open to external support in teaching or providing added value careers advice and support for young people at risk. And so everything we did was via those kind of particular people within those LEPs. So that might be, I mean, I agree that the climate's a tough climate at the moment, but as and when, you know, it might be a useful way of trying to identify where there's need within the school community across the country.
Thank you so much for that piece of advice there, Tim. We're slowly coming close to time, and so I'd just like to ask our guest speakers just one last question, and sort of piggybacks off the theme of these last few questions. But if I'll start off with Jess, one piece of advice that you would give to your fellow service providers that are trying to access the further education and skills sector and those routes to funding, one piece of advice.
I think mine's slightly left field. And for us, the biggest thing that's made an impact is recording our social return on investment, because that opens doors. It shows people the impact that you're making. And if you can do that from the beginning, it will save you time in the long run, but it will also help, you know, especially in situations like yours, Lucy, it will help you get in front of people and make them want to listen to you. So
fantastic. And Sam?
So mine has been demonstrated by Jess, actually, and that is, don't underestimate the value of actually accrediting what you do. So ensuring that at the end of a program, a young person has a accredited, recognized piece of education in some shape or form. A, opens up funding. B, gives you far more credibility when you're then trying to secure funding from other routes, because we all like something to be able to look back and from a due diligence perspective.
Thank you so much. Well, that concludes our In Conversation event today. A huge thanks once again to Sam Olsen and Jess Tyrrell for their time today. To you, our live audience who came today as part of the session, and thank you so much for contributing as well. If you'd like to find out more about Movement to Work or New Meaning, the contact details for Sam and Jess will be shared after this. We've recorded the session, so we will share the recording and contact details after that. If you'd like to reach out to the BOOST team, then you can always contact us at iep@youngfoundation.org, and we can follow up any other queries or questions that you might have as a result of this session. But if you also want more information about the BOOST scaling program and the organizations we are working with, then please do visit www.inclusiveeconomypartnership.gov.uk/boost. I'm doing my best television presenter impression here. And be sure to keep a lookout for our next event in our In Conversation series. But last but not least, thank you once more to Sam and Jess for today and for you all attending.